There's a quiet kind of pain that no one sees, the ache of a dream you no longer speak of but still feel. You tell yourself you've moved on, that life just didn't work out that way. But every now and then, in the stillness or the silence or the loneliness, you feel it, that pull towards something more. Not louder, not bigger, just more, you. And maybe you've learned to bury it, because somewhere along the way someone told you it was unrealistic. Maybe the world didn't clap when you tried the first time. Maybe life hit hard and your belief crumbled quietly, piece by piece beneath the weight of disappointment. But here's the thing, just because you stopped believing in it, doesn't mean it stopped belonging to you. What if the life you keep searching for is hidden inside the very belief you abandoned? What if your soul is still holding the blueprint, waiting for you to dust it off? Not to impress anyone, not to prove anything, but because you were never meant to live without it. See, we don't just bury beliefs, we bury pieces of ourselves. We bury wonder and courage, and the child in us who used to imagine without fear. And the tragedy, the world loses something too, because no one else can live the life you were meant to live. No one else can carry your fire. So I wanted to ask you something, not loudly, not to pressure, just to open a quiet door in your mind. What dream have you been quietly grieving? What part of you did you silence to survive, that now longs to be heard again? And if that belief wasn't buried, where might it have taken you? Not all pain comes from failure. Some of it comes from avoidance, from turning away from what was calling us. And here's a gentle truth. Belief doesn't begin with applause, it begins with a whisper, a flicker, a moment where you say, maybe it's not too late. And maybe it is. Maybe the life you thought was gone is only waiting for your permission to live again. You don't need to leap, you don't need to shout it from rooftops, but you do need to stop pretending you're okay without it, because you're not fully, not deeply. You can build a comfortable life on top of buried dreams, but you will always feel the ground shifting beneath you. You will always feel like something is missing, because something is you. So dig it back up. The belief, the vision, the version of you that used to trust the unseen. You buried it to protect yourself. I understand, but now it's time to rescue yourself. The life you long for isn't somewhere out there. It's underneath what you've learned to hide. It's underneath fear, underneath doubt, underneath I'm fine. And maybe, just maybe, the belief you buried is the very reason you're still restless. Not because you failed, but because you stopped listening to your own soul. Let it speak again, not for the world, but for you, because the belief you bury is the life you'll never live. There are two kinds of voices that shape our lives. The ones we speak aloud, and the ones we quietly swallow. And strangely, it is the second that tends to last longer, echoing in our choices, our patterns, and the way we carry ourselves through the world. Have you ever wondered why certain things bother you more than they should? Why a compliment feels uncomfortable, or a quiet room feels heavy? Sometimes the answer lies not in what's happening outside you, but in what you've never given yourself permission to say. Because what we silence doesn't die, it hides, and then it waits. It waits in your hesitation to speak up. It waits in the way you settle for fine when you mean frustrated. It waits in your inability to rest even when you're exhausted, because deep down you know there's more, but you've never said it aloud. We are taught early on how to behave, how to please, how to adapt, but rarely are we taught how to honor our inner truth. And so we trade pieces of ourselves for approval. We bite back what we really feel. We edit our desires into something more acceptable. We mute the truth, not because we are weak, but because we're afraid of rejection, afraid of looking foolish, afraid of wanting too much in a world that tells us to be grateful for less. But let me ask you something gently. What has it cost you to stay silent? Not in volume, in honesty. What have you abandoned inside, just to keep the peace? See, the thing is, silence leaks. It shows up in misalignment, in regret, in jobs that feel safe, but suffocating. It shows up in relationships where you smile on the outside but feel unseen on the inside. Because what we silence within becomes the very echo we live with. The echo in your self-doubt, the echo in your over-explaining, the echo in your need to prove yourself over and over again. And yet we keep building lives atop these silences, don't we? Houses with beautiful walls, but hollow rooms. Schedules full of activity, but starved of meaning. But you don't have to keep building like this. There is another way. It starts not with shouting, but with listening, with becoming quiet enough to hear what you've been too afraid to admit. Maybe it's a longing, maybe it's anger, maybe it's a voice that says, "This isn't who I truly am." Whatever it is, it's sacred, not shameful, not selfish, sacred. You see, the soul doesn't demand a stage. It only asks for a seat at the table. And when you finally let your truth have a voice, even if just whispered in a journal, or confessed in the quiet of a sleepless night, something begins to shift. The echoes soften, the patterns loosen, you begin to build differently. You start saying yes to things that nourish you. You stop apologizing for needing more, and most importantly, you begin to trust your own voice. Not the voice the world shaped, not the one fear sculpted, but yours, and the life you build from that place. It resonates, it rings true, it carries a quiet strength that doesn't need to prove, because it simply is. So if you've been feeling off, lost, or like you're living someone else's life, don't rush to change your career, your habits, or your location. Start with your silence. Ask yourself gently, what truth have I buried to belong? And what might change if I spoke it, even to myself? Because the cost of silence isn't just regret, it's disconnection. And the reward of truth isn't noise, it's peace. Remember this, what you silence within will echo through the life you build, but what you honor within will become the foundation of the life you were born to live. There is a kind of grief that has no funeral, no mourners, no good. It happens quietly, in the silence between decisions, in the space where a dream was supposed to grow, but didn't. You don't always notice it at first. You keep moving, keep doing what's expected. You smile, nod, show up, but inside something feels distant, like a part of you stayed behind somewhere you're too afraid to revisit. Have you ever wondered where your spark went? That old excitement, that vision that used to keep you up at night. You didn't lose it, you buried it, not out of weakness, but out of necessity, out of survival, out of exhaustion. Because life doesn't always leave room for dreams, does it? Not when bills are due, not when others need you, not when you're told be realistic. So you compromise, you adjust, you quiet the longing in your chest. And eventually, the world claps, not for your truth, but for your conformity. And yet, even buried things have roots. Even silence carries weight. You tell yourself you're fine, but are you really? Are you truly fulfilled, or just functional? Are you inspired, or merely surviving? The truth is, we don't bury dreams and walk away untouched. We bury dreams, and with them, a piece of ourselves. That vision you once had, it wasn't just a goal, it was you in raw, unfiltered form. The part of you that dared to hope, the part that saw beauty before proof, the part that trusted your own voice. When you turned your back on it, you didn't just abandon the dream, you abandoned the version of yourself that believed in it. And now you feel the hollow ache of something missing, but you can't quite name it. Let me ask you gently, what dream did you walk away from because someone else couldn't see it? And who might you have become if you stayed with it just a little longer? This isn't about regret, this is about remembering, because you're not too far gone. The dream is still there, not dead, just waiting for you to look inward instead of outward, waiting for you to give it oxygen again. You see, dreams don't demand perfection, they only ask for your return. And the moment you choose to acknowledge what you once buried, you begin to unearth yourself. You'll find your energy again, not from coffee or willpower, but from alignment. You'll find direction again, not from maps or mentors, but from clarity. You'll feel alive again, not from noise or distraction, but from truth. Because the dream was never the goal, it was the compass, the expression of your truest self trying to speak. And when you silence that voice, you lose your sense of direction. You become efficient, but not inspired, busy, but not whole. So I ask you this, with softness, not urgency, what would happen if you picked that dream back up? Not to prove anything, not to impress anyone, just to feel like you again. What would change if you said, "This still matters to me"? What could awaken if you stopped betraying the most honest part of you? Because here's the quiet truth. No one tells you. You don't get to bury your dreams and keep your soul intact. They are woven together, and when you deny one, the other fades. But the good news, it's never too late to return, not to where you were but to who you were becoming. So go gently, dig carefully, dust it off, breathe life back into the version of you that once believed more was possible, because it still is, it always was. And maybe the ache you feel isn't failure, maybe it's just the part of you that's still buried, calling you home. Real belief doesn't shout, it doesn't demand attention. It doesn't come wrapped in certainty or thunder or applause. No, belief, real belief, is quieter than that. It's a steady heartbeat beneath the noise. A flicker of light that refuses to go out, even in darkness. You see, the world has taught us to associate belief with volume, with bold declarations, with big moves, with the kind of confidence that can fill a room. But belief isn't always loud. Sometimes it's soft, sometimes it's shaky, sometimes it hides in a whisper that says, "Try again." Have you ever had a moment where everything told you to give up, but something inside you just wouldn't let you? That was belief. Not loud, just there, still breathing, still standing, still holding space for you. We live in a time where external validation is the measure of success, where likes, followers, and recognition are seen as signs that you're doing it right. But belief was never meant to come from outside. It was never meant to be fed by attention. Belief is what lives after the applause ends, or never comes at all. It's what gets you out of bed when no one's watching. It's what makes you pick up the pieces of a dream that didn't go as planned. It's what whispers, "This matters," even when everything around you says, "Let it go." Let me ask you gently, where have you confused noise for knowing? Where have you dismissed your path because it didn't look big enough? We often overlook the most powerful moments of our lives because they don't come dressed in spectacle. We forget that belief is built quietly, decision by decision, day by day. Think of a tree in winter, no leaves, no blossoms, no signs of life on the surface. But beneath the soil, roots are deepening, preparing, strengthening. You may not see it, but something sacred is happening. Belief works like that. It grows in seasons of stillness, in the silence between the setbacks, in the space where nothing seems to be happening, but everything is being prepared. You don't need to be loud to believe in yourself. You don't need to be certain. You only need to stay, to keep showing up, to keep walking towards something your heart understands, even if your mind can't fully explain it. Because belief doesn't mean you always know. It means you don't quit. And the more you honor that quiet pull inside you, the louder it will become. Not in sound, but in impact. One day people will call you determined, driven, focused, but they'll never see the nights you spent doubting yourself and still choosing to continue. They'll never hear the battles you fought in silence. But you will, you'll know. And that kind of belief, the kind built in the quiet, that's the kind that lasts. So if you feel small today, unseen or uncertain, don't rush to fix it. Don't try to shout louder. Instead, go inward. Sit with the ember that hasn't gone out. Ask it gently, what are you still here to teach me? What do I still believe in, even when I pretend I don't? Because there is something in you that hasn't given up. Something deeper than doubt. Something older than fear. And no matter how loud the world gets, your belief, quiet and persistent, will carry you forward, one step at a time. Not because you shouted it, but because you lived it. There's a kind of calm that isn't peace, it's escape. And there's a kind of silence that doesn't heal, it hides. We like to think that if we just avoid what hurts, what scares us, what feels uncertain, it will go away. But it doesn't. It waits. Avoidance wears many faces. It can look like busyness, like distraction, like pretending to be okay because the truth feels too heavy to hold. It whispers things like, "Now's not the right time, maybe later, it's not that bad." But underneath that soothing voice is something unspoken, grief. Grief for the life we could be living if we weren't afraid to face what needs to be faced. You see, avoidance doesn't erase what we don't want to deal with, it delays it. And in the delay, something within us begins to mourn. Not loudly, not in tears, but in small, quiet aches. The ache of untapped potential, the ache of unspoken truth, the ache of knowing, deep down, that something in you is being neglected. We avoid hard conversations because we fear conflict. We avoid big decisions because we fear failure. We avoid our deepest desires because we fear disappointment. But avoidance doesn't protect us, it imprisons us. It creates a life built on almost and maybes, where we stay busy enough to feel productive, but disconnected enough to feel lost. Let me ask you gently, what are you pretending not to know? What have you quietly pushed aside that now shows up as restlessness, or anxiety, or numbness? It's easy to call that avoidance peace. It feels better in the moment, less risky, less painful. But real peace doesn't come from escape. It comes from courage, from facing what hurts with open eyes and a steady heart. Peace is not the absence of discomfort, it's the presence of integrity. It's what happens when your outer life and inner life finally match. When you stop running, when you stop hiding from your own reflection. I know it's not easy. There are things we all avoid because the truth feels sharp, but avoidance turns pain into permanence. And sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do for yourself is to face what you've been afraid to feel. To say, I'm not okay, and that's honest. I want more, and that's allowed. I've been settling, and I'm ready to stop. When you say those words, something inside you softens. Not because the problem disappears, but because you finally appear. You show up for yourself. And that presence, that honesty, is the beginning of real peace. Avoidance, on the other hand, is a slow leak. You don't notice the cost right away, but over time, you feel disconnected from your own life. You smile, but it feels distant. You succeed, but it feels hollow. You rest, but you don't feel restored. Because deep down a part of you is grieving, not for what happened, but for what you never gave yourself permission to face. So I ask you this, not to provoke, but to invite. What would happen if you stopped avoiding and started listening? What truth is knocking on your door, asking to be let in, not to hurt you but to heal you? You may find that the thing you feared isn't as powerful as you imagined, that facing it brings not pain but relief, that speaking the truth opens a door you didn't know was locked. And beyond that door is peace, not the quiet that comes from denial, but the quiet that comes from alignment, the stillness that says, this is who I really am. Because when you finally face what you've been avoiding, you stop grieving the life you never lived, and you start living the life you no longer need to hide from. There are two kinds of what-ifs in life, the ones that make us curious, and the ones that haunt us. What if it all goes wrong? What if I fail? What if I'm not good enough? But then, there's the other kind, the quiet ache that lives behind the choices we never made, the question that lingers long after the moment has passed. What if I had tried? This is the one that keeps people up at night, not the failure itself, but the absence of effort, not the fall but the refusal to leap. You see, most regrets aren't born from failure, they're born from hesitation, from standing at the edge of possibility and deciding to walk away, not because you couldn't, but because you didn't. And maybe you told yourself the timing wasn't right. Maybe you thought you weren't ready. Maybe someone else's voice drowned out your own. But time has a way of revealing truth. And as the years pass, it becomes harder to ignore the quiet voice that still wonders, who might I have become if I'd just tried? We think we're protecting ourselves when we hold back. We tell ourselves we're being smart, cautious, responsible, but more often than not, what we're really doing is hiding. Hiding from risk, hiding from rejection, hiding from the discomfort of vulnerability. But you can only hide for so long. Eventually, life holds a mirror to your hesitation, and what you see staring back isn't who you truly are, it's who you've settled for. Let me ask you gently, what dream, desire, or direction have you quietly avoided, not because you didn't want it, but because you were afraid to try? And deeper still, what would change in your life if you gave yourself permission to find out? You see, it's not about the outcome, it never really was. It's about honoring the part of you that wanted more, and being brave enough to meet that part with act. Trying doesn't mean succeeding on the first attempt. It doesn't guarantee applause, validation, or a clean result. But trying does mean you listened to yourself. You respected your longing enough to respond to it, and that in itself is powerful. Even if it doesn't work out the way you imagined, trying brings clarity. You learn, you grow, you become someone who trusts themselves, someone who doesn't need certainty to move forward, someone who lives, not in fear, but in alignment. And maybe that's the quiet tragedy of those who never try. They never get to meet the version of themselves they could have been. The artist, who never painted. The writerst, who never painted. The writer who never wrote. The entrepreneur who never built. The lover who never said how they felt. Each one carrying a question that was never answered, not by fate, but by choice. So I offer you this soft reminder. The fear you feel is real, but it isn't final. It's only one voice. And there's another voice, quieter, but deeper, that says, try, not because it's safe, not because it's certain, but because your soul is asking for it. And if that voice lives in you, if it's still whispering beneath the noise, then the story isn't over. Not yet. You don't need to change your whole life overnight. You only need to begin. One small step. One brave choice. One simple answer to the question, what if I tried? Because the pain of failure passes. The pain of rejection fades. But the pain of wondering who you could have been, that pain lingers. So don't let fear become your legacy. Let effort be. Let courage be. Let trying, even trembling, be the reason you walk through life without regrets. Because the most painful what if is the one you never dared to try. We live in a world obsessed with timelines. By this age, you should be here. By that age, you should have done that. And if you've fallen behind, the world rarely offers you grace. But I will, because here's the truth no one says loud enough. You are not too late. You are not beyond repair. You are not past the point of possibility. It doesn't matter how long it's been, or how far off track you feel, or how many times you've started and stopped. There is still a way back to yourself, and it begins, not with a massive plan, not with a perfect strategy, but with one quiet, powerful decision. Return to what? To the version of you that dared, that dreamed, that loved deeply, and believed wildly, before life taught you to shrink, because that version is not gone. They're just buried under years of noise, distraction, responsibility, and perhaps even pain. But buried does not mean broken, and forgotten does not mean finished. You see, life has a way of hardening us. We start soft open, hopeful, unafraid to be seen. Then slowly, little by little we learn to guard. We learn to protect ourselves with busyness, and excuses, and carefully constructed stories about why it's too late. But maybe it's not too late. Maybe it's just time to come back, to turn inward instead of outward, to stop measuring your worth by the clock and start measuring it by your courage. Let me ask you gently, what have you convinced yourself you missed out on, simply because the timing no longer fits someone else's definition of right? And what would change if you allowed yourself to begin now, exactly as you are? The thing is, there are people out there living lives they love, not because they got an early start, but because they stopped waiting for permission. They made the decision to return, to truth, to vision, to alignment, even if it felt like they were years behind. Because the moment you make that decision, even quietly, something in the universe responds, not with fireworks perhaps, but with clarity, with signs, with a subtle shift inside you that says, I'm back. And once you return to yourself, even in part, everything else begins to move. You stop rushing, you stop comparing, you begin to walk with calm urgency, not desperation, but direction. And that walk, that's where life begins again, not from scratch, but from experience, from wisdom, from the kind of depth that only comes from having wandered and found your way home. So no, you're not too late. You're right on time for the version of your life that's finally ready for you, the one that doesn't ask for perfection, just presence. There is no award for rushing. There is no shame in returning. There is only this question: What would my life look like if I started walking toward myself again today? Not toward what others want, not toward old expectations, but toward truth, toward what lights you up from the inside, even if no one else understands it. It's one decision, one conversation, one brave moment of honesty, where you whisper, I'm ready, not to become someone new, but to remember who you've always been. Because that version of you, the one who still believes, still hopes, still dreams, isn't lost. They're just waiting. And the door to that life you once imagined, it's still open. It always was. So if you hear nothing else, hear this. You are not too late. You're just one decision away from return.